Wolverine cuts to the heart of the matter.
We get him, and we shred him.
Watch the premiere of X-Men Saturday morning, October 31st on Fox.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. On this podcast, we pull from the seemingly endless queue of movies and shows, and maybe even other surprises along the way as part of our podcast channel, From the Queue. Please subscribe, like, and review From the Queue on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, especially Spotify and Apple, as you can get those algorithms going with positive feedback. You can also find our channel on BlueSky at From the Queue. You can find us on Instagram at From the Queue, as well as Threads. If you are listening to us on YouTube, all our links will be in the description below. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Instagram at Jerome Cuson. You can find me on BlueSky at JeromeC1985. My co-host is Brian. You can find him on Twitter for now at Brian DeBrain. Brian, here tonight, we are doing something very special as usual. We pair up a professional wrestling match with a movie or television show, and in this case, we're getting a little wacky. This might be our best connection, although I've come up with a better one for November. Brian knows this, but this month we are going to be discussing the British Bulldog versus Shawn Michaels from the November 14th Saturday night's main event, and we are going to be doing our top 5 X-Men episodes from the animated series that aired from 1992 through 1997. Now, why are we connecting these things? Well, that this episode of Saturday night's main event, this is the last Saturday night's main event of that era. So basically, from 85 through 92, it was shot and taped just 4 days before the premiere of X-Men, which premiered October 31st, Halloween of 1992, with Night of the Sentinels Parts 1 and 2. Brian, isn't it crazy to think that the last Saturday night's main event, kind of the last of the old guard with Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior, and transitioning into Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, that this is airing also at a time when we're entering a new era for cartoons, as well as we're getting away from the He-Mans and the G.I. Joes, and we're going into the X-Men's and the Tiny Toons and the others as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting connection you made there, Jerome, because if you look at the timeline, this was around the time that like 80s cartoons were at like their end. Like Transformers was definitely on their last legs. Like they were literally going into the Beast Wars in the mid 90s. Like the original run was pretty much outdated at that point, because if you look at the history of Transformers, the toys, which kind of pushed the animated series, their toy line was changing, right? So the original run and the original lineup was kind of gone. So the fans were kind of like going off into different cartoons at this point and different toys or whatnot. So if you look at 92, it was perfect because they had Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, and Spider-Man the Animated Series all starting at the same time. So it was this perfect, synergy going on, I think. And then, of course, this leads to the big, boom period of the 90s when it comes to animated shows and whatnot. And the correlation with the Saturday night's main event, I couldn't even believe it, because if you look at the dates too, it is the end of the major run, which kind of correlates and coincides with the Transformers run. Because if you look, Saturday night's main event started in 85, got big, and then kind of peaked off, and then went to Fox for the last year, which is what we're going to talk about later on. But and they even shortened it from 90 minutes to an hour. So it was just this transitional era, and you can tell because by the end of like the 92 run of Saturday night's main event, they're pushing Bret Hart, they're pushing Shawn Michaels, they're pushing the younger talent. In the earlier runs, it was Hogan, Andre, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior. The guard has changed, you know what I'm saying? And even you'll see it like when we talk about the Saturday night's main event later on, how Warrior was on the way out, literally, and he wasn't even like with the company when the footage aired. So just crazy times. and the way that kind of correlates with the debut of X-Men the animated series, I think is just so weird because it is the transition from like the 80s into the 90s. And also, if you look at the history of the X-Men the animated series, they had that failed, I wouldn't say failed, but like a pilot before in like 89, prior to the X-Men, which featured Kitty Pryde, also kind of dated for the time as well. So they took some notes, changed it, and we got a different run, different lineup because of that, and it kind of coincides with the 90s. So they kind of all fit together with all these timings and all the debut dates going on. So I thought it was a really cool idea to go with this because I initially wanted to do the top 5 episodes for the X-Men series. And, Jerome kind of tied it in. I was like, British Bulldog and Shawn Michaels. And we'll go into the history of that later on, but it makes perfect sense from when that match was recorded to when this episode, or when the first episode aired for X-Men. So it's really, really cool to see that kind of come together. And listen, I binge watched the whole series again right when they announced the lineup for X-Men 97 and all the dates. And I was like, okay, I got to just watch it again. Here we go. And in the last month or two or whatever it's been, I've just binge watched the whole series again. So I'm really in tune to the series. And I know people have their feelings about season 5, but season 5 does have its moments, regardless of the, questionable animation. I don't want to say bad animation, because I think some episodes actually.
I mean, it is bad. I'm not blaming the animators. I'm blaming the studio for not putting the money in to get the same quality of animation. Season 5 does have its moments, I would agree, but it's a huge downturn from season 4.
For sure, because I feel like if you look at what the phalanx looked like in season 5, I felt like it could have looked a lot sharper and a lot cooler and clearer in the season 3, season 4 era. But then again, people don't like the phalanx. Some people don't like the phalanx stuff anyway, so I get that. But it's kind of like
it's very 90s and very goofy. It's definitely not peak X-Men. It's just a little bit weird. But first, let's talk about Saturday night's main event. Again, airing on November the 14th, 1992. So basically, this is the Triple Crown. All 3 WWF championships on the line on the same show. A great rarity. I mean, even on the pay-per-views, you would see maybe 1 title, maybe 2 titles. Very rarely would you see 3 titles. And in this case, the most significant of these matches was the British Bulldog versus Shawn Michaels. British Bulldog coming off beating Bret the Hitman Hart at Wembley Stadium in one of the greatest matches in the history of the company. British Bulldog coming away with the victory, having all kinds of momentum, and is seemingly well-positioned possibly for even a main event run, given what he was doing. But wouldn't you know it, the steroid era was coming to an end as the Ultimate Warrior and the British Bulldog were popped in some form or fashion for the possible use of human growth hormone. So both men, essentially after this show, would be gone, and the British Bulldog did lose the Intercontinental title to Shawn Michaels. And I mean, look, you can't really argue with the fact that in terms of transitioning eras, this is a big moment, because how often would somebody as small as Shawn Michaels defeat somebody as big as the British Bulldog clean? I mean, there was no Sherry at ringside for this one. Yeah, there was a little bit of hijinks with taking the turnbuckle corner off. But really, that was more ingenuity than anything else. And for Shawn Michaels to basically reverse the suplex after working the back the entire match and come away with the victory, I mean, this is as symbolic almost as Bret Hart winning the championship. And I mean, I know that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, obviously they have their tremendous rivalry across the decade of the late 80s into the early 90s. And, they also feuded for all 3 major championships in the WWF. But it's crazy to me that Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart main evented a pay-per-view in 1992 with Ric Flair, Randy Savage on the card. Hulk Hogan was around in the early part of the 90s, and Piper. It's really bizarre to me. But Shawn Michaels and the British Bulldog. I was telling Brian about this. Brian, I don't know, did you realize the tragedy, and I don't use this word lightly, but the tragedy of the Bulldog Shawn Michaels rivalry?
Well, once you put the historical numbers in perspective, it's a total domination by Shawn Michaels. I can't even, I forgot about the 95 Rumble too, and that's kind of even more like, oh, you feel so bad for the Bulldog because all this shit he had to go through, right? But then the stuff with like Michaels, it's like that was always going to be the guy that was going to have a one up on him, like always going to get the one up on him. It's I don't know, because once you get to 97, it's like what are we doing here? Why are we even booking this match in the Bulldog's hometown just for him to like lose in front of his dying sister? Like we didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? Like that was just Shawn Michaels and his power plays. But over time,
we gotta go through the list because there's one.
Go in order.
So October 27th, when it was taped, Shawn Michaels defeats British Bulldog to win the WWF Intercontinental title. King of the Ring 1996. Now Shawn Michaels goes in as the defending World Wrestling Federation champion, but he does defeat the British Bulldog cleanly. So that's 2 titles. Monday Night Raw in May of 1997, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels defeat Owen Hart and the British Bulldog to win the WWF Tag Team titles. And Bulldog does take the pin, I will point out. Then later on in the year, the British Bulldog loses the European title, a title that means absolutely nothing and really is only significant because the British Bulldog held it, won it in Europe, then he loses it in Europe to Shawn Michaels. And those are 4 major championships. I want to give Brian the credit, though, for coming up with the icing on the cake.
Which was the Royal Rumble, which is still like, I don't know why they did it that way, because it felt like they were just teasing you that they were going to push the British Bulldog. And what's ended up happening? He gets a tag match with the Eli and Jacob Blue brothers at WrestleMania. Like, come on, man. Like, as a kid, I was just like, I'd much rather see Shawn Michaels versus the British Bulldog right now at WrestleMania, because I was not feeling Diesel and Shawn. Like, it didn't feel right because I wasn't a big Diesel fan at the time, and I wasn't buying the Diesel as like the big baby face. Like, and considering Shawn was the smaller guy, it was just so weird because you would switch the dynamic usually, right? Which makes their other match really well worked compared to this one, I think, because I'm not a big fan of their Mania match, but I am a big fan of the Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies match where they, did the no DQ. But still, like, this should have been like the Bulldog's revenge match, it felt like, or something. Like, I don't know. Because it felt like they really screwed him over, and they gave him this consolation battle royal win on Raw like a few weeks later or something like that. I thought that was the dumbest thing because Vince was celebrating like he won the Rumble, and it was like, dude, this is not right. So yeah, I mean,
think about when Lex Luger winning by countout, and they celebrated for that too. So it's and it's funny that the Allied powers are both on the end of that. So it's funny.
It sucks because they gave him a nothing match in Mania. I think that's what really hurts, is because like everyone had storylines going into Mania except Luger and Bulldog. Bulldog already had the built-in storyline with Shawn based off the Rumble. So there was just missed opportunities, I felt like, all over the place on that card, especially with Bret Hart and Backlund. Good God. But man, it just felt like the Bulldog.
I mean, there is a good reason that 1995 is regarded as one of the worst years in the history of wrestling. Not just the WWF, but WCW, and a lot of the best stuff is happening in ECW. It's happening in Japan. It's just not happening in the major companies, and that is very much reflected. But I mean, the Shawn Michaels Bulldog match, they always had really good chemistry. I mean, regardless of what you feel about the politics surrounding it, I mean, those two, they matched up really well together. Bulldog with the power, Shawn Michaels with the speed. This one's a little bit slower than some of their matches, just because, I mean, Shawn Michaels wasn't at that level yet. He wasn't at kind of his peak form. And, I mean, this is just, it's a little bit more methodical at times just because, again, Shawn Michaels is focusing so much on the back. But the other thing I want to say about this match that I really like is that, Bobby Heenan is a heel announcer, and he kind of roots for all the heels. But I think it speaks to just who he is as an announcer, for him to put over Shawn Michaels as strongly as he does. And again, he could do this with a lot of guys, but like he wasn't into Papa Shango nearly as much. Like he wasn't putting over DiBiase and IRS nearly as much as Shawn Michaels. Like he is celebrating when Shawn Michaels wins the Intercontinental title. And I remember distinctly at WrestleMania 8, like whistling the theme song, saying that Shawn Michaels has left the building. Like he really put over Shawn Michaels strong. And I feel like that has as much to do with him being over as anything else. Because back in the day, commentators putting people over used to matter. I don't know that it really matters anymore because commentary has just been bastardized and ruined so much. But Bobby Heenan, what a guy.
Yeah, you can tell when Bobby Heenan really loves a wrestler, he'll just like go over the moon with him. Like I think he had a love for Shawn Michaels, man, because I don't know if you've seen that behind the scenes photo, but like it's Bobby Heenan showing Shawn Michaels like some golf moves or something, and you see like Shawn Michaels in his rockers gear, so that was kind of taboo at the time. And I was like, man, he must have had a real love for Shawn Michaels, because I've also heard on record saying that Bobby Heenan's like favorite match ever, or one of his favorite matches ever, was Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21. And that tells you everything you need to know, because I felt like that early run of Shawn Michaels, Bobby Heenan was really like instrumental in like making him like the sexy boy and like making him sound like Elvis. Because the whole idea of like Shawn Michaels has left the building, that's an Elvis gimmick from back in the 60s. So I thought that was a really cool like way that they tied it together. And then like the Heartbreak Hotel, right? That's a little more like Elvis influence too, but still like Bobby Heenan was putting it over. And then, you know, if you wanted to kind of make a comparison to that, if you look at Goldberg's run, especially like the 98 run, Bobby Heenan was in love with the guy. Like he was over the moon with the guy and thought this guy is going to save WCW. And it didn't turn out that way, but you could just tell in that first like 98 run, he was so happy to see Goldberg wrestle in these like 30-second squash matches and put the guy over as like the number one dude on the planet, which he was at the time, I think, in around June 90. I think he was bigger than Austin in the summer of 98. So like when Bobby Heenan really attaches to a guy, he makes that guy. You know what I'm saying? Even though he was not managing HBK at the time, that would have been perfect. He was managing Mr. Perfect, but like I think him and Shawn Michaels would have had this incredible dynamic that would have been later for the like more long term, I think, than a Sherry as the manager for Shawn Michaels. But I get why they did Sherry too, because it's like she's the cougar and he's like the sexy boy and the boy toy, so that makes sense. But yeah, Bobby Heenan was really key to this match and getting the whole backstory line over, and the fact that like he made it seem like Shawn Michaels is like the smartest wrestler in the world, for making it seem like the British Bulldog beat himself, even though it's really like Shawn Michaels like outsmarted the guy. And I love the way that actually Bulldog sold it, like he knocked out. But it's very plausible, because if you have so much stress on your back and all of a sudden it just one impact move, it's like you can be done. I've seen it. Some of my family members have some of my older family members have like back issues, and one blow to the back and they're just like out. So that was very believable, and I wish that more people would use this finish, even though I felt like I've seen this a couple times, but not necessarily as the finish. It'd be like a tease. But I think a finish like this is really smart out of nowhere, especially for a guy that's like smaller than the Bulldog. That's like a smart way to beat a bigger Bulldog. So I like this match a lot. Out of all the Shawn Michaels British Bulldog matches, I would have to say, like, I think I like the King of the Ring one more, because it has that weird dynamic with Diana and the soap opera of it all. The 97 one is just kind of like sad by the end of it, once you realize that, you know, British Bulldog's sister's about to die.
That match is really good. It's got a lot of heat. I mean, the problem with this match is that the crowd sweetening is in full effect, and you know that you are in a very specific era of the WWF when they are saying from the campus of, like, that is a sign that the company is not doing well, because this is the second time that we've reviewed a WWF match that has taken place on a college campus. And again, it's mid-90s WWF, so that's what you should expect, because when you go to campuses, you are likely to draw a decent crowd, whereas if you're going to bigger arenas, maybe not.
For sure. And I hate to say this, but I kind of ruined the magic for some of my friends who were old school fans like that. Like I point out the crowd sweetening and like, don't tell me that. And then especially if it's the old ECW footage, like where they use the same crowd sweetening
really
noise over and over, and you don't notice it as a kid.
Much worse.
But as you get older, you notice the same bullhorn every fucking 2 minutes, and you realize it's the same loop. So, hey, man, look, it's good for TV. I'll say that. Is it a good look for the live audience? I'm not sure, but you know, it's you're shooting it for TV, so to speak. So you gotta make it louder. You gotta make it more active, and you can tell the crowd was like kind of dead, because I can tell like those Saturday night's main event tapings were usually in the middle of like a longer taping. and the crowds used to be just so kind of like, whatever. And then they would take maybe some Coliseum video matches in between, and that's why you would get some of these Coliseum video matches where the crowd's like not really into it, and they just
Like
didn't
Hulk
bother.
Hogan versus Typhoon, which I know you popped for.
Yeah, and another example is you ever seen the Hart Foundation versus Legion of Doom?
I think I've seen that match. Didn't it end like a double DQ or something?
It actually ended with a clean power slam, which I was shocked with. But the thing was, is the crowd just didn't like have the energy for it. If you would have announced it and like build to it, yeah. But they just randomly taped it for Coliseum Video, man. It was just so weird.
I mean, we got the Steiner brothers versus Brett and Owen because of Coliseum Video as well.
And again, the crowd is just like kind of like, whoa, not like jacked and excited. They're just kind of like, okay, like this is what we're gonna get, I guess.
Mid-90s, it's a mid-90s WWF show. I mean, as much as people criticize wrestling crowds now, I mean, they can't appreciate just how bad it was during that time.
For sure. And yeah, I guess Survivor Series 92, that's a whole other discussion for another date, which we'll set up later.
We'll come back to it. We are going to come back to it at some point. Maybe later on this year, maybe for a special anniversary. But for right now, we have done a YouTube exclusive of episodes 1 and 2 of X-Men 97. We will be back later this week with another YouTube exclusive talking about X-Men 97 episodes 3 and 4. I am so excited to talk about episode 3 specifically. That's the one I've seen, but I mean, it's the show is so good. We did not necessarily want to do like a full rewatch, didn't want to do like a full discussion. Like Spider-Man 98, I feel like that is a show that maybe doesn't get talked about as much. But X-Men 92, I mean, everybody's watched it a million times. Everybody has a list of their favorite episodes. So that's what we are going to do here. We are going to go through our top 5 favorite X-Men animated series episodes. Brian, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, my number 5 is Beauty of the Beast, and this is the Hank McCoy specific episode, so to speak, where he's helping this woman regain her eyesight and she's human. And the dad is not so like keen on having mutant interference and doesn't even know that Hank McCoy is a part of it. So they fall in love, and of course it's like the father doesn't approve or whatever. And it's not your typical X-Men storyline, but I feel like this is like Beast's shining moment in the show almost. Like he gets like the full treatment of like the star treatment. The story's about him. He becomes the tragic hero at the end. Because like basically she accepts him for who he is, and that's so great to see. Like the whole buildup, you're just expecting her to like reject him, right? Because she can't see him yet. So once she finally sees him, she sees he's like a blue beast or whatever, and she's like, "You're exactly how I pictured you." And they hug and embrace. And I was like, "Oh, dude, that's cool." But then he kind of rejects her a little bit, knowing that his presence in her life is going to cause disruption and chaos. So he's willing to sacrifice his love life to maintain her peacefulness. So I thought, okay, I get what you're doing here. You're sacrificing. You're making yourself a victim, even though you can't have the girl. But in this case, like he did prove to the father, and that whole thing, that he proved to the father that he was a good person. He's willing to help his daughter out. But I thought this whole episode was like a twist on one of those classic Twilight Zone episodes, where like it's that one where the beauty is the eye beholder one, where like we see like a normal woman, but everyone else is kind of like ugly, but the ugly face is the normal face kind of gimmick. So that's what they were going for, but then they kind of shifted it, twisted it up, and Hank McCoy does get a love interest, man. So that was really cool. And I love Beast, and I love this interpretation of Beast. I love what Beast is. He's still Beast in X-Men 97, so I'm really appreciative of that. And this is kind of like his big moment, because I felt like all the other episodes, he's kind of like the side character, but in this one, he's the focus, and I'm glad he gets to have a love in his life.
I'm going to talk more about this one later on.
Ooh, okay. So you're number 5.
So my number 5 is also about a blue mutant. It is not about Beast. It is indeed about Nightcrawler. My number 5 episode is appropriately called Nightcrawler. The premise of this episode, of course, is Gambit, Wolverine, and Rogue are on a ski trip in Germany. There are rumors of a demon hiding in a local monastery, and it is revealed to be Nightcrawler. He looks like a devil, but he is deeply philosophical. He is very peaceful. This episode is one of the best of season 4. Season 4, I think, has some pretty underrated episodes. I don't think it's as cohesive, perhaps, as the first 3 seasons, but between this and One Man's Worth, it's a really fine episode, and you get some surprisingly deep philosophical discussions between Wolverine and Nightcrawler. That's what I appreciate most. It also establishes some lore that will later on be further developed between Rogue and Nightcrawler. I know that we are going to be getting more of Nightcrawler at some point in X-Men 97, which makes me very, very excited. This was a great way to bring X-Men into Nightcrawler into the animated series. This episode looks very different because they're in a town. They're kind of in a smaller area, monastery, religious iconography. This episode is very, very good. And in putting this list together, I really struggled with like what should be number 5. To me, this is pretty underrated. So that's why I put this one as my number 5. So it is indeed Nightcrawler, season 4, episode 8.
Oh boy, a perfect booking, huh? My number 4, Nightcrawler. Yeah, this episode is like very spiritual, and coming from a place where I'm a former practicing Catholic. I don't really go to church no more. I'm more of an agnostic. In my younger days, I was probably going to call myself an atheist, but now I've kind of grown to be agnostic. But this him and Wolverine just talking about faith and like just trusting humans, and then let humans judge you or whatever, and it's just that whole like idea of like human beings being monsters, and then them looking at Nightcrawler as a monster, sort of, you know what I mean? It's like it's got the Frankenstein vibes, it's got like the gothic universal horror vibes mixed with like some of the Hammer horror, you know what I mean? So it's got a little bit of all that, and then it's got this deep like religious philosophical tone to it, and I think that like this is the best performance of Nightcrawler in terms of like the voice, because he's like, I don't know what it is, but the way he performs the voice is like he's come to peace with what he is, and I think that's kind of like a spiritual, like beautiful thing, you know what I mean? And I think this whole episode is kind of like to show you that no matter how hard things can get, a guy can look like the devil and still have all this faith in humanity at the end of it all. So I think that's a very, very deep message, and I don't know if it's underrated. Like, I feel like this is one of the more popular episodes. I don't know if they're confusing it or mixing it up with the other Nightcrawler episode.
Maybe it's just season 4 in general. Maybe I don't feel it gets the credit, but I mean, you're right. I do think that it has been on some of the lists that I've seen. And in terms of X-Men appearances, like when you think about Psylocke, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Archangel, like these are X-Men in the comic books, but there's only so much space that they have for the team. I mean, there's a really good Archangel episode from season 3, but quite frankly, the Colossus never really did anything for me on the animated series, either the Juggernaut or the Omega episode. This Nightcrawler one really stands out.
Yeah, and especially like the look of it and the way that like all the monks kind of look, and they got that one monk that turned against them. So there's a lot of cool stuff in here that reminds you of like the classic horror kind of vibes to it. Plus, it's got like I said, that deep kind of message to it. So again, I guess I don't know if Twilight Zone had an influence on the show, but it feels like Twilight Zone. I mean, probably it did have an influence on more than just the X-Men during this time. It was like very influential for the time, but I feel like some of the more deep
I think
episodes, the kind of there's some kind of connection to it.
There's a lot of anthology shows. I mean, Tales from the Crypt was on around this time. You had the Freddy series. You had Outer Limits. So that was definitely a vibe that was in the air. So it would not surprise me if there was some of that influence. But my number 4 is A Rogue's Tale. This is the first of a couple. I mean, season 2 is my favorite season of the show. So I think it is only fair that it gets probably the most representation on my list. The concept of this episode is that with no Xavier around, Rogue's mind is giving her a lot of trouble. Because the suppressed consciousness of Ms. Marvel is in her head. Because Rogue, her power is that she can absorb. She did not have the power of super strength and flying until she absorbed all of Ms. Marvel's energy and left her in a coma. You get some Mystique, you get some Avalanche, you get some Pyro. This is just a really, really strong episode that gets into the tragedy of the Ms. Marvel character. because on the one hand, like Rogue is our hero, but on the other hand, Ms. Marvel is very sympathetic, and like you see like her almost become like a horror villain at some point. But again, the ending is very sweet as Rogue goes to the hospital to visit her and tells Ms. Marvel her real name. Ms. Marvel shows kinds of signs of life. I don't know if we're ever going to get a payoff to that, but it would be amazing to actually have Ms. Marvel wake up and have that be some sort of a storyline in X-Men '97. But you get a lot of tension between Rogue and Mystique. In this case, Jean is the one that helps Rogue suppress this consciousness one more time, and it's this episode is just so good. And season 2 has a lot of showcase episodes. There's one for Storm, Wolverine, Gambit, Rogue, Beast. There are 2 of them that really stand out. This is the first of those 2. A Rogue's Tale is my number 4.
It's an honorable mention for me. It's just that ending is so like sad. I find that whole episode just sad and depressing because like the consequences of it all and how fucked over Ms. Marvel is, and like it's so fucked up, man. And I know they probably didn't intend it to be like that, but like hindsight, all these years later, it's like, wow, they really. I mean, she really got violated, like mentally violated. Like her consciousness is like completely gone almost, and the fact that she's barely waking up at the end of that episode. I wish they would have just gave me 30 more seconds and have her wake up and then acknowledge Rogue and then maybe just like have this acknowledgement saying like, I forgive you. Like, I feel like there is so much left on the table that there's like, I don't know. It felt like she didn't forgive Rogue or anything like that. So it's just, I hope they come back to that because it just seems like, it feels like Rogue really screwed over Miss Marvel. And I don't want to think that Rogue, but at the time she was being manipulated by Mystique and she was kind of a bad guy. So that's why she did it. And she totally regrets it. But it just feels like they totally violated Miss Marvel, man. So it's an honorable mention for sure. That ending just makes me feel so bad, and I don't know if that was the intention either. Because I think now they would have rewrote the episode to give you that. Okay, she's going to be better and she's going to be Miss Marvel again, as opposed to just Rogue taking her whole like personality.
I don't know. X-Men '97 is going to some dark places. I don't know that that's true.
I don't know. I just want happy endings, man, because that was just, even for '94 or whatever it was, that was just so dark.
I don't know. I think that's part of the fun of the X-Men. It's a fucking soap opera, man, and that's what I think.
I get it. I mean, just geez, it's so like if you look at it now, it just seems so like they would never have wrote that. I think today, because it just violates the character. So, but number 3 for me, Out of the Past Part 2. This is the one with Lady Deathstrike and. They go underground in the sewer and they find that spaceship, and it's kind of like eating people's souls or whatever. And I remember watching this a lot, this particular episode a lot for some reason. Like I felt like it would appear on TV a lot whenever I would be clicking through the channels, and I would just happen to see this episode a lot. So this episode really sticks out for me, and it's got like you get a little bit of the Lady Deathstrike, Wolverine kind of background, and he calls her Yuriko, and I thought that's very like they know each other, man. So I thought that was a cool little connection. But they, obviously broke up later on in the timeline, and now Wolverine regrets it or whatever, and now they're dealing with this crazy alien that's taking people's souls or whatever.
That's a really good example of breakups by individual members of the X-Men becoming the team's problems.
Exactly. They make their love life a problem. But, I mean, look, Wolverine likes to hook up with, like, the most controversial women. Not controversial, but just dangerous women, and it comes back to bite him in the ass a lot. In this case, this episode with the Morlocks and everything down there too as well, there was just a lot going on, but there was this mystery to it of like, what the fuck is going on? Because it has this horror, again, a horror element to it where like you see like the souls inside like that, whatever it is, and it's so freaky, and it's like, how do we restore these souls? And you feel like, oh shit, Jubilee's dead, and you're worried all these other characters are dead, and so they finally figured out that they overloaded with electricity at the end and just literally making it explode, and everyone's souls go back. But man, that was a really like trippy episode to watch as a kid. I'll always remember those 2 episodes. I call them the Lady Deathstrike episodes. But man, because like the way they light the sewer looks so good, because nowadays, I think we've talked about this in sewer scenes that we've talked about, like Alligators, an example, where everything's really dark. But of course, it's a kid's show, so they don't have to do that. So they just lit the place up, man. And, they made it look cool. And obviously, the sewers in New York do not look like that, but they made it seem like, okay, we got this space right here with the Morlocks and they're living. All of a sudden, we got this random giant ship that's no one noticed over there. So it made it seem like the underground subway system, sewer system, was just so like unexplored and so much bigger than we imagined, even though we'd already seen the Morlocks. So yeah, there was a lot going on with this episode, but I love it because it makes me nostalgic, and you get to see like Lady Deathstrike, and I got to see her in X-Men too, so that's why, Lady Deathstrike's kind of one of my favorites just because of these two episodes. And then what I've read is that they actually had to change the animation on their cleavage because they made it too big, so they just put a shirt on and then fill in all the cells of the animation. So that was a really interesting note that I didn't even pick up on as a kid, but I just remember that freaking spaceship with that creature coming out and just absorbing people, and it was like a crazy thing, and you didn't know if the X-Men were going to live or die in that episode, so that was really cool.
I think they're good episodes. I wouldn't even necessarily say they're honorable mentions. I think the problem with season 3 is so much about the Phoenix Saga that it really just kind of envelops everything else. And for me, if I'm going to pick a season 3 episode, which I'm going to do with my number 3, I'm going to pick the Dark Phoenix Part 4. The Dark Phoenix Part 4, The Fate of the Phoenix. And I really had a hard time like picking, because essentially it is a 9-part run. You've got the first part, which is just Jean becoming the Phoenix and kind of taking us to the logical endpoint with Shi'ar and D'Ken. And this one is like the ultimate fate of Jean Grey. And I am going with the final part just because I think it is a fantastic episode. You get to see Jean Grey in her classic uniform. You get a trial by combat. Brian, I don't know about you, but this is probably the first time that I ever heard the phrase trial by combat. And it's pretty gnarly what happens to the X-Men in this episode. As the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, I mean, they essentially kick the X-Men's ass. And the only reason that they survive is because of Phoenix. And there's the possibility that Jean may have to die and be sacrificed, and the rest of the X-Men give a little bit of their power to save Jean Grey, not unlike the ending of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So when I saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I was like, that's exactly what they did in the Phoenix finale. And I just think that this episode is so good. And really, I could have picked a number of these episodes. I think they really do work in cohesion with each other. It's just I can't pick 9 episodes, so this kind of represents the entire Phoenix Saga, which is the best interpretation of the Phoenix Saga that has been put to screen up to this point, and quite frankly, I cannot imagine it being any better.
See, I couldn't pick one specific episode from the Phoenix Saga. That was my trouble with this list, is that like they're so ingrained together that I couldn't pick an individual episode, because it feels like it couldn't stand on their own without the other supported narratives. It's really hard, because like my one criticism of the end finale, the episode that you picked, is like they made it too easy to regenerate Jean Grey. Like I think the the Queen, whatever, she knew that like she could just bring her back if everyone sacrificed a little bit of their energy. She just didn't mention that to the X-Men, and like it's like she knew that, and they just didn't tell the X-Men. It's like, yeah, she can sacrifice herself and save the day, no problem, and then you can just bring her back. But they made it seem like this giant thing, and then gave her this, and then the X-Men got this easy out at the end. Like, I'm definitely willing to sacrifice part of my life to bring her back. So I was just like, okay, did she really sacrifice then? If everyone just like willing to bring her back immediately? So it just kind of felt like it didn't have time to breathe. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe they should have waited a couple episodes later to bring her back. But it just felt like that was a cheap out to it all, because like, oh, they're just gonna bring her back right now. So that was my one thing, is like I think they should have waited to bring her back. Like besides, I think she like she comes back halfway through, like kind of lost anyway. So I don't know if you want to do that, if they wanted to do that again, but like
the ending of the first 5-parter is that Phoenix has to go away, and then she's basically gone for 2 or 3 episodes, and then she comes back, and it's just kind of a weird thing.
I would have waited to like bring her back. I would have let it simmer a little bit just to make it seem like the sacrifice was something.
The ending of the season, so I'm okay with what they did. I think it was the right choice. It brought about a a satisfactory ending to the season, and very much appreciated. Because again, season 4 is kind of a mess, even though there's some really good parts, and I think having it resolved here made a lot of sense. So, what is your number 2?
Mine is Time Fugitives Part 2, and I know there's a lot of like time travel going on in this X-Men series, but I specifically picked this one because this involves the virus that is like, this takes place after when Bishop goes back in time the first time, after Days of Futures Past, parts 1 and 2. This is later on, where him going back screwed it up again, and now there's like this virus that's killing all these mutants or whatever. So then it's also affecting the future timeline hundreds of years after Bishop, where Cable is, it features Cable now and his kids or whatever, and his legacy, and he's, trying to save the mutant race as well again because of this virus. So they're all like trying to go back in time, but they're like, it's like their two timeline missions are interacting with each other. So you got that going on, plus like this idea that, oh my God, there's this virus, who's gonna, where's the virus coming from? And then you realize it's, kind of a man-made virus, and that, once it goes to Wolverine, I was like, oh shit, that saves the day? How does that happen? And then it kind of explained it through science. Basically, because Wolverine can heal himself, they're going to use his antibodies to create, a cure for the disease or the virus. So that was really smart. And Cable kind of figured it out at the end, too. Like, I don't think that was the plan for Cable, but once he realized he can utilize Wolverine's DNA and his healing capabilities, like, it just kind of changed everything. And then it corrected both timelines. So that was like really fucking cool, where like all these different consequences of time travel are occurring. And like it's almost like Terminator, where you got too many Terminators coming in at the same time, crossing over. But in this case, it wasn't too overwhelming, and that they actually fixed the timelines at the end, so that was really cool. I actually like this more than Days of Futures Past, because this kind of features like the consequences of what happens of Days of Futures Past, where like there are consequences going back in time and screwing up things, and going back to your current timeline and realizing, oh shit, that didn't fix the problem at all, it just created a new one. So I thought that was really interesting, because like they tease the virus like right after, I think, Days of Futures Past Part 2 when he comes back, and they don't really touch upon it until like later on in this two-parter. So like, and then once Cable comes in, it's like, okay, how does this fucking come together? Because we know Bishop is from 2055 and Cable's from like 2030 something. So there's all these questions, but it's like, how does this all going to connect? And they just made it all connect, even with the current X-Men. And Wolverine was kind of like the catalyst of it all. So I thought that was really cool. And for like a mutant virus kind of episode, I thought it really worked well, and using science as like an out to save the day.
Well, the irony is that given what happens to Nathan, it's just very interesting how the parallels, what's going on, even in X-Men '97. I think this episode is also fine. I'm not actually, in a way, I like part 1 better, just because I think it goes to the really dark place of Apocalypse basically killing the X-Men, and then Cable realizing that in order to save the past, he has to save Apocalypse, and just how dark that idea is. I think season 2 works because of season 1, or episode part 2 works because of episode 1. Like, you get a lot of the Back to the Future 2 stuff, like where they're going through the same events over, but they're doing things a little bit differently. So that's something that I very much appreciate. And I think it's interesting that Creed is in 2 of your episodes, and you haven't mentioned him yet. He's a very prominent part of both of your episodes that are in the top 5. And just a very interesting villain, because he's basically the equivalent of a fascist. And like I said, I think this episode is okay. It's definitely not one of my favorites. So.
Yeah, Creed, how do I put this? He's got a complicated history, and he's not the Creed we're talking about, what you're thinking of. Like, now he's not Sabretooth. He's the brother of Sabretooth, right?
And son of Sabretooth, as was revealed in my number 2, which is Beauty and the Beast. Your number 5 is my number 2. I think this is easily the best of the showcase episodes. And I think when you watch this episode as if you're younger, I don't necessarily know that this one is going to shine as much, but you watch this episode now, and I think it holds up extremely well. Not just because of the Beast stuff, but the Creed stuff also pays off. in a really great way. You also get the great voiceover when Creed is told and it is revealed that he is the son of Sabretooth. I mean, he just completely loses it. And the Friends of Humanity essentially abandon him. And it's a very cathartic moment because Creed has just been this complete menace for the entire season. And, Mr. Sinister has been the A villain, but Creed has very much been this B villain. And to just have this pay off in a really big way, I love it. Beauty and again, I will echo everything that you said, because of course this episode is about Beast, and that is what makes the episode great. But I wanted to focus on the things that you did not necessarily address, so that's why I'm focusing on the ending part, which is also really, really good.
Again, that Twilight Zone connection, man, and I mean, yeah, I mean it's a direct connection almost to that episode that I was describing. So I thought that was really cool. So before I go into my number one, let me put in some honorable mentions. You mentioned Obsession, which is the Archangel trying to get revenge on Apocalypse episode. I thought that was a really dark episode because it's almost like the, Moby Dick, the white whale, what obsession can lead you to. And pretty much Apocalypse knew that he was being obsessed with by Archangel and just used it against him. And then he couldn't even do shit because once they got on his ship, they thought, oh, we can just control Apocalypse using his ship. Dude, you can't control Apocalypse using his ship, man. No, come on. So it was it was like the heroes failing at the end. So it's one of those type of episodes, but it's like, man, Obsession. It's such a great, I don't know, not a motivator, but a great theme to have in a show like this, especially with Archangel who wants revenge on Apocalypse because Apocalypse tricked him, thinking that he was going to get a cure and turned him into Archangel. So just great storytelling in terms of like revenge plot, but it's the obsession that kind of makes him not get Apocalypse at the end. So, but he does get his revenge towards that Apocalypse saga, which also I want to mention Beyond Good and Evil Part 4. That's kind of where this is the final, standoff against Apocalypse. So they finally send him to the astral plane, and he gets stuck in the astral plane without a physical form. Yeah, that was a good little episode as well. I mentioned the Phalanx Covenant. I like Part 2 a lot because, like, I know Mr. Sinister, like, he's kind of a bitch, right? He's willing to like manipulate and experiment on mutants, but when he needs to be saved, he goes to the X-Men, right? He goes to the X-Men asking for help, especially in the Phalanx saga or the Phalanx episodes. And we mentioned the animation is kind of shoddy or whatever, but it is kind of freaky. It's very kind of like The Thing, and you see like the different like bodies, personalities inside it, and kind of morphing and turning into those bodies or faces or whatever. It's very freaky. I like that episode a lot. And another weird episode is Love in Vain. That's the one where Rogue meets her old boyfriend and they realize, oh, we can touch now. But then she realizes that he's been, taken over by an alien. And the aliens are like these worm people or like worm aliens. And they're fucking like riding a whale in space and the whale's the ship. And I was just thinking, like, this is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life. And how come I don't remember this? And it's just like one of those things that you obviously remember as an adult. And it's obviously going to stick out more because it's just so fucking weird that even Jerome forgot about it. And I had to remind him, and he was like, oh, yeah, space whales. And also Old Soldiers. That's the one with Captain America and the origin story with Wolverine. I watched that one quite recently, actually, and I like it a lot. It's just I find a lot of flaws in it because I don't know why, but Wolverine is just like monologuing to himself. Makes no sense. And he's narrating to himself, obviously to us, but he's just
people always talk about the obsession with Wolverine going to the movies. It starts with this. Like, it really is. I mean, Wolverine is just about in every episode, and it gets kind of annoying at a certain point. And again, it's like people talk. I think people memory hole the lack of love for Cyclops and Jean. I mean, it's in the animated series too. I mean, yes, Jean did get the Phoenix storyline, but Jean gets like there's an entire series of YouTube videos about Jean being useless, which I know Brian isn't totally convinced by, but it's really funny to me. And I think part of the joy of X-Men 97 is how it is much more of an ensemble piece than this show is.
For sure. And then, of course, Days of Futures Past 1 and 2, honorable mentions. But if I had to pick one time travel episode out of all of it, was going to be Time Fugitives Part 2. My number one episode of all my favorite episodes is Night of the Sentinels Part 1. This is the one where I had it on VHS, the Special Collector's Edition VHS as a kid. And I remember it had number 1 on it. I didn't collect the whole series. I just happened to get that somehow, and I kept watching that one episode over and over and over. And I never got to see Part 2 until later on. So I always was kind of left in suspense, like, oh my God, what's going to happen to Jubilee? What's going to happen to Morph? And turns out Morph, they thought he died, man, but he came back. But this whole episode sets up everything in the series. You see like the media portrayals of mutants, the negativity by the media. You see Jubilee's family rejecting her, and that kind of sad setup. And then you see like the X-Men team kind of like going into a mission but not totally being prepared, and then losing Morph, which is very symbolic because I don't think at that point Wolverine lost a soldier or like lost a man or a woman. You know what I mean? Like it felt like that was the first time Wolverine lost someone close to him who was a fellow soldier, right? So that was very important as well. And then, of course, the Sentinels kind of setting up Master Mold, Senator Kelly, and all that stuff. All that kind of stuff, all that stuff like stems from the first episode. So, and I've seen this episode so many times. I remember Jubilee in the arcade so well. I remember Jubilee on the second floor of her house just crying, just be like, what is wrong with me or whatever? And just like, there's nothing wrong with you, man. Your parents are just shit. So very powerful stuff, man. And it just sets up the series so well. And it's not like, I mean, it's a memorable episode because it sets everything up. And I don't know if it's going to, comparatively like to the other episodes, like, I don't know. Like to me, this is a personal number one because I've seen it so many times and I had the VHS. And I almost want to go back on eBay and kind of look and possibly buy the original VHS run, but not all the episodes came out on VHS, surprisingly. So they stopped at a certain point in season 2 or 3. So yeah, just crazy that I had that one VHS, the collector's edition, which is even harder to find, and it was like it wasn't even in color; it was black with like gold and red lining on the cover art. So it was just wow. Yeah, that's pretty much my favorite episode of all time, just because I've seen it so many times. And look, I'm a big Jubilee mark, and it's because of this episode. So.
I have used this once for you more out of context for some reason. I don't know about you, but it's a great line delivery, and I really like it as well. No, actually, that's part 2. Part 1 and part 2 are both on my honorable mentions. Days of Future Past parts 1 and 2, also on my honorable mentions, just because it's wild to see this vision of the future and just the way it all pays off, and Bishop thinking he's still in 2055 when he's in 1993 because the city still looks like crap. Great commentary there. I also want to point out from season 2, Mojo Vision, which Brian does not like. I love that episode. It was almost my number 5, as a matter of fact, but it's so crazy, it's so wacky, it's so zany. It's a great episode before you get to the 2-part finale. So big fan of that. One Man's Worth from season 4. Basically, any of the other Phoenix episodes would also potentially be on the list as well. Brian, I'm just going to say the worst episode is Jubilee's Fairy Tale Theater. I hate that episode with the passion of 1,000 suns. And it made me question everything. And that's all I could say. Have Yourself a Morlock Little Christmas is also pretty bad too.
Okay, Jubilee's Fairy Tale. That's what I call the Magic School Bus episode. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying, but the X-Men should not be playing in the same territory.
No, I'm saying I'm not. I don't like it either. Like I tried to watch it recently too, and I had to just skip it and go to the next episode. But it's just like, oh wow, that's why this episode doesn't work so well, because they try to make Jubilee and Miss Frizzle. And then she has a bunch of like students with her, and it's like, wait, can't we just watch what Xavier and Wolverine are doing instead of watching the kids? Like they seem to be doing something much cooler, and yet we're here stuck watching these kids. So yeah, that's a perfect example of season 5. Kind of like exemplifies what season 5 was all about. Just kind of filler, and not really going out of their way to be cool about it. But they just wanted filler, and that's definitely the most fillerish episode of the whole run.
So this leads to my number 1, which is the final decision, the finale of season 1. Again, I think season 2 is my favorite, but I think the reunion episodes, they're not as good. And is kind of underwhelming. I mean, I think they pay off things pretty well. It just feels like there's something missing in terms of the final decision. Why this episode stands out is that, again, it is an ensemble. It's not just focusing on one particular X-Man, but it really brings together all of the characters, the important characters of season one. You have Magneto kind of not being like, Magneto is set up to be really evil to the point where Xavier feels like he can justify making him see the Holocaust again. But Magneto here is in the babyface role. You get Xavier flying the plane and basically blasting Master Mold into dust. You have Jubilee standing up for herself and declaring herself to be an X-Man. You have Wolverine trying to sacrifice, like Wolverine basically with what happened to Morph is trying to make sure that doesn't happen to Gambit. Cyclops saying we're not going to leave anybody behind this time. Storm and Rogue both being badasses in their own way. This episode rules so much, and some very good visuals. I don't know how practical Master Mold's plan is, but given the way that they had built up the Sentinels as these huge threats, and just the way that they were kind of designed, and the way that they killed Morph, and the X-Men start off by very much struggling with them in the pilot. It only makes sense for them to absolutely decimate them in the finale and kind of get. And look, we've seen the Sentinels since then, but this is like the big victory over the Sentinels, and that's what makes the final decision a really, really great episode of the X-Men. And that is why this is my number one, the final decision. So good. Just remember, Brian, the brave are always the first to die.
Yeah, and that's also the episode where Beast finally gets released from prison, right? And it becomes like this whole thing about having faith in the justice system, right? That's the one, right?
That it is. I don't know if he should still have faith in the justice system, because he got very lucky that the X-Men just happened to save Senator/President Kelly. But yes.
Yeah, that's the thing about that episode. I kind of feel like, I don't know, because that whole arc about Beast being in jail the first season, it's like, I guess his message is that he wants to have the justice system and like make it work and have faith in it, right? But we know it doesn't work, and yet he somehow luckily gets out at the end of the season, on kind of like randomly, not randomly, but just luckily. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Beast is just that naive or he just really has faith in democracy, but I just thought that was like a really interesting dynamic, because it's like he has all this faith in democracy, yet democracy's put him in jail. You know what I mean? So it's like, he's like a political prisoner, right? That's the whole gimmick. But he still has all this faith to just like, I don't know. He's more of a man than I am, I guess, because I would have just lost all kinds of faith in democracy after shit going down like that and get stuck in jail for trying to save the world. So more power to Beast for being the better human than I am.
Yeah, so that is those are our favorite episodes. Any other moments? I mean, look, season 2, the premiere, I think is really good. I love the idea of Wolverine being in the danger room, murdering a bunch of Cyclopses. That always tickles me to death.
Oh man, him in his wedding suit, getting all torn up.
It's so good. It's so good.
That is such an example of like avoiding your problems, man. Like in the worst possible way, and just avoiding it, and then he's just like trying to just fight it all away, and it is
an example of the X-Men making their personal problems everyone's problems.
Again. But one more little moment I remember. It's from Savage Heart Strangeland Part 2. It's kind of like a mixed bag in terms of the characters, because I think some of the characters, or the mutates, I should say, are just really stupid. Like, I am not a fan of that.
Oh, yeah. I love like, they're clearly going for, like, Island of Dr. Moreau vibes. And I like seeing Magneto and Xavier together, but the payoff doesn't totally work.
And then the payoff is, like, 2 giant kaijus fighting each other. Like, and making this giant explosion that can be seen from space. So I was just like, wow, that's a decision, man. Like, everything was bad up to this point, but that final 30 seconds of the 2 kaijus fighting were just like, wow, they went there, and they look really cool. So I give them credit for that, going that far and crazy with it.
So what are we going to be doing next week, Brian?
I already forgot. You threw me for a loop there. What are we doing next week?
Oh, so next week, Brian, you are not going to be here because we are going to be, Benjamin and I are discussing number 62 through 42. We are ranking all of the Disney theatrically released movies. This is all really, really exciting. We have already recorded the episode, a very, very fun 90 minutes. And we're going to be doing a series of 3, again, 60 movies to discuss. We'll discuss the first 20 or so next week. But this weekend, Brian, that is not all. I know you don't care, but WrestleMania is this weekend. And in honor of WrestleMania, my colleague Ryan Rosansky and I, we are going to be discussing and reviewing WrestleMania Night 1, which, if you look at so WWE released the cards for both nights. Night 1 is by far the better and stronger of the two. So I'm very excited that Ryan and I are going to do and discuss the better of the two shows.
Good luck with that, because my focus for WrestleMania weekend will be trying to watch the Joey Janela Spring Break shows, and I don't know. It starts here in the West Coast at 4 p.m. on Friday, and I'm still going to be at work, so I don't know how that's going to work. And I might just avoid spoilers. I know that sounds crazy, but whenever I watch a Spring Break show, I just want to be totally surprised because of this craziness.
I do have to say that Triller does a very good job of getting the replays up quickly, so should not be a problem.
That seems to be my plan, and I think I'm just going to try to avoid spoilers because usually the Joey Janela shows are some of the craziest shit going on. But last year's was more of a traditional card, and I was actually there for the LA show, so that was interesting because I was shocked at how normal it was.
I have to say, I appreciate the fact that they are doing a Spring Break, and then they're doing a Spring Break 2 that is the clusterfuck, and the clusterfuck is one night, and I could just not watch it. 88 men, though. 88 men and women.
Is that? They've confirmed 88 people so far. Oh my god!
I mean, that's what I've seen. I've seen the number 88 thrown around. I don't know if it's actually going to be 88, but you cannot get me to watch that show at gunpoint.
Usually, when I watch a clusterfuck, it's me getting drunk and stoned at the end of the night with some buddies, and we're just like trying to name random like wrestlers that we've seen from the past. Like, what if this guy shows up randomly? And some of us might be right. Like one year, I said Buff Bagwell because he was having a moment on social media, and he just came out and then got eliminated really quick and didn't even do anything, and he had a broken leg or something. So totally a GCW clusterfuck type move. So I'm excited for that because that's the one time of year where you can just not give a fuck and just enjoy the wackiness of wrestling, I think, in terms of one match, and that's the clusterfuck.
All right, so for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back here this weekend with Ryan Rosansky, next week with Ben Phillips, and then in 2 weeks, Brian and I will be back for another episode. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, I have to look at the calendar